as we talk tonight, there may be some questions that I'm not going to be able to answer. So if that's the case, then since I will start with this disclaimer. Employment law is not my principal area of practice. So if I were an orthopedic surgeon, then employment law is like, I don't know, dermatology, I guess, for me. So I got to get through it to get to my stuff. But so I've got a pretty decent operating knowledge of this, and I talked to a couple of the employment guys in my office. I tried to convince one of them to come up tonight, but he was going to get in trouble with his wife if he did. So if there's any questions you have that I can't answer, I will go and talk to the gods of employment law at Durham Jones Pinniger and get those answers for you. So the way this is organized is the first 2 pages are the actual questions that went out in the survey. And to protect the innocent or the guilty, your responses are not in here, so we didn't compile the results, but we've got the answers here. Then you may recall at the end of the survey there was room for you to be able to submit additional questions. So those are on pages 3 and 4, and I'll go over those. Mostly we got questions. We did get one political statement, which we've included in here, which we'll discuss briefly. Then pages 5 through 8 are some best practice tips. Actually, that's page 5. And then starting on page 6 through 8 is just kind of a point-by-point summary of some of the main rules and some decisions from some courts that I thought that you might find helpful and that feed into the answers that I gave to the questions. And then starting on page 10 is the actual law. So if you're the type of person who likes to cuddle up at night with a copy of the plumbing code or the fuel gas code or the mechanical code or the residential code, and now you just want to get cozy with commuting and wage and hour law, well, start on page 10. And you can see it there. Then the last page on page 15 is an explanation of how to calculate regular rate. You need to be able to calculate regular rate in order to make sure that you are paying your overtime correctly. And there are a couple questions in here that deal with regular rate, so that's why I put it in there at the end. So that's what we've got. All right, so the first group of questions, so I'm back on page 1. The first group of questions had to do with employees with company-owned vehicles. Now, the biggest thing that distinguishes the category 1 questions from the category 2 questions is the fact that if you have someone who is driving a company vehicle, and you do not want to have to compensate them for travel, you have to have an agreement with them. That's new law within the last couple of years. That's new federal code. And the purpose of that agreement is just for the employee to acknowledge and understand that they are not going to be paid to commute in that vehicle. Now, that doesn't mean that you never have to pay them to be in the vehicle, but what it does mean is that the mere fact that they're in a company vehicle doesn't mean that they're going to be paid. And so that agreement is intended to make that clear to your employees. So that is an absolute requirement if you have an employee with a vehicle and you don't want to be compensating them for the time that they spend in that. So question number 1, do I have to pay my employee to drive from home to the job site if I provide them with a company vehicle? The answer is not if you have an appropriate agreement and the job site is in their normal commuting area. Now, the question that comes up all the time here is, well, what's the normal commuting area? The answer is, like so many answers in the law, it depends. So it depends on where you do, the nature of your business and where you do your work. For some of you, it's probably from like Brigham City and Logan all the way down to Santaquin, Heber, the back side of the mountains, front side of the mountains, and stuff like that. Uinta Basin's probably outside of everybody on the Wasatch Front. Nephi's maybe starting to get out of it unless you do some stuff down there consistently, especially if you're in Utah County. So it's vague, okay? It's your normal commuting area. So it's where you usually do work.
Isn't there a 75-mile limit on that? I thought I'd read that.
That could be like a rule of thumb, but I don't think but there's nothing in any of the regulations that locks that down. In fact, so if you go back to the appendix on page 10 and go through there, those are all the regulations on travel. And I don't recall seeing anything about 75 miles in any of those. And I know I've got clients who have work up in Cache Valley and in Utah County and are based in Davis County. So, and they might have guys all over the place like that. So it's really kind of a business specific sort of a thing. B, do I have to pay my employees to drive from home to the shop and then to the job site? If they have a company vehicle, remember. The answer is yes, unless they're going to the shop as incidental or de minimis. So if they have to come to the shop to pick somebody up, to get tools, to get materials for the work they're going to be doing that day, then coming to the shop is not going to be compensated time. But if they need to be there at the shop for some purpose in order to do what they're going to do at the job site, so getting tools, getting people, getting materials, getting direction, stuff like that, then from the shop to the job site, it's more likely that it's going to be compensable. If they just forgot something and they stop in for a few minutes to grab it, that's de minimis, that's incidental, then the answer is no. But it's more of if there's a necessity in being at your shop before they go to the job site for some business purpose or work purpose, that increases the likelihood you got to pay them to go to the job site from your shop, but not to the shop. I like that haircut. Glad you joined the club. Give me a couple years and I'll work on this. All right, we're on C, 1C. Do I have to pay my employee to pick up another employee and then drive from home to the job site? All right, this is the guys who are riding, typically no. The person who's driving, yes, in most instances, especially if the driver is just driving and they're not going to be doing work at the job site. So let me give you an example. I have a neighbor who's a foreman for Salmon Electric. He's got,
keep going.
Is that like a bad word?
No.
Is that like, don't,
He's got to look at
do I have to, are we only talking plumbers here and I'm going to get zapped if I talk electricians?
That's right.
I don't think I have any. I've got 2 electricians in my neighborhood, but no plumbers. All right, so he's got a crew cab pickup, and they were doing a job in Logan, and he's the foreman, and he would pick up 3 or 4 guys in Weaver County on his way up to Cache Valley for a year while they were doing a job up there. So since he's working at the job site and he's driving and he has the company vehicle, he doesn't get compensated for that drive. Because his job isn't to drive, his job is to work. So if he wasn't picking up anybody, he wouldn't be compensated to go to the job site if you've got the agreement with him, right? That's question number 1. Does that make sense? Now, if he was driving a bunch of guys to the job site and dropping them off and then going around and stuff like that, then for purposes of what he was doing up there, he's a driver. So that increases the likelihood that you're going to have to pay him because his job then is to be a bus driver, taxi driver, that kind of a thing. So if that person's going to the job site, you don't have to compensate them. The people in the truck that are going along, they don't have to be compensated unless unless they're having like a safety meeting or a job planning meeting while they're on the way there. And every time those situations have come up, and I've asked the question, okay, so what's going on in the truck while everybody's on their way to work? Well, most of those guys are sleeping. That's the answer I get most of the time, right? In fact, there's a case from Arizona where everybody would meet at like this convenience store, and then one guy would drive, and the rest of the guys would just ride. And they made a claim that went all the way to the Federal Court of Appeals, saying that they should get compensated for that. And they said, well, we would talk about work. And the court said, just because you're talking about the job doesn't mean you're going to get paid. If you're not going over plans and having like a real serious conversation, you know, if it's just kind of, you know, maybe we'll do some of this today or some of that today, but it's just part of an overall conversation and you're not really digging into it, that doesn't count. It's got to be a serious planning or safety conversation or something like that. So the pickup thing, you only pay the driver if the driver's the bus driver. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? You guys okay with that? Yeah. D, do I have to pay my employee to drive from home to the first job site, other job sites throughout the day, and then home from the last job site? So you have to pay for going between job sites, but you don't have to pay to the first or from the last, as long as you've got an agreement with your employee. Remember, we're still talking about someone who's driving a company vehicle, and you got to have that agreement with anybody who's driving a company vehicle. So you don't have to pay him to go to the first one. You don't have to pay him to go home from the last one, but you do need to pay him in between. All right. 2 is employees without a company vehicle, and then it's all the same questions. So do I have to pay my employee to drive from home to the job site? No, as long as it's in their normal commuting area. So they're driving their own vehicle now. As long as you're in the normal commuting area, they don't get paid. The home to the shop thing, it's the same answer. All right. So if there is a business reason or a work reason that they are coming to the shop before, then you're going to have to pay them as soon as they leave the shop. But if they're just stopping in to pick something up, no, they don't get paid till they get to the job site. You go back to question A. The pickup thing is the same thing. Really, the only difference in the number 2 questions from the number 1 questions, because they're driving their own vehicle, is that you don't have to have that agreement as a condition of not paying them on the part 2 questions. Otherwise, it's the same thing. So if you go to question 2B at the top of page, or 2D at the top of page 2, that in my experience, in most instances, that does not apply to someone with their own vehicle, because usually when someone's going from job site to job site, at least when this type of a question comes up, they're in a company vehicle. You know, that's usually service or things like that, or it could be someone who has supervisory responsibilities. But a lot of times when someone gets to a level of supervision that they're going from job site to job site, from supervising, they're an exempt employee, and we're not talking about wage and hour and overtime and stuff like that. You're paying them a salary. So that's the other thing I should have mentioned at the start, is all the stuff that we're talking about here is wage and hour. These are your hourly people. These are not your exempt employees who have got management responsibilities, hiring, firing authority, and stuff like that you pay salaries. So keep that in mind. Okay, any questions on 1 or 2? Okay.
What kind of records do we have to keep to prove this? I mean, how do you know whether they were talking about the job in the truck or how that kind of stuff?
You don't?
Yeah, I know. That's what. Is your word against theirs, or
They were dreaming
Well,
about it.
this is the thing. The burden's on them. So if they come and say, pay me because we talk about the job, then say, okay, well, what were you talking about?
They have to have
So-
good record keeping, obviously,
They're-
like the miles
they're
they're
the ones-
driving and what the conversations
They're the
had
ones
during
who were
those
asking to
trips.
be paid.
Yeah.
And so if first they got to ask you, if you don't pay them, then they got to go hire a lawyer. They got to go to court. They got to prove it to a judge. They're the plaintiff. The court says, okay, prove to me what was going on in the truck. Prove that you were reviewing the plans. Prove that you had the safety meeting. So it's them keeping the record so they can prove it. It's not on you to prove that they don't. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
All right. All right, out of town travel. So if someone travels out of town in their own vehicle, then you need to compensate them for their travel time. But if they use some form of public transportation, so a bus, train, plane, Uber, I guess, whatever, then you only pay them during regular business hours. And if they're and if your policy is that they get a half hour or an hour off for lunch, then you don't have to pay them that hour. You get the benefit of that. That's back in some of the rules you'll see. So during travel between regular hours, you have to pay them. If they're on public transportation after regular hours, you don't have to compensate them because you wouldn't be compensating them if they were at home.
What qualifies as out of town?
Not within their normal commuting area,
Which is?
their normal commuting area. We were talking about that a little bit at the start. There's no hard and fast rule on it. It would be outside of the place where, yeah, so I think I mentioned that I have some clients who have jobs going on in Cache Valley and all the way down into Utah County. So really for them, their normal commuting area is probably on the Wasatch Front, Santa Quinn to Brigham City, or maybe even the Idaho border. And on the back, Cache County down to Heber.
Park cities.
Parks, yeah, Heber, Park City, Colville, Morgan County, Tooele going east, Huntsville up in Weber County, all of Cache Valley. I think there are definitely companies in the state, construction companies in the state. That's the normal commuting area. Just, that's where you're bidding jobs. That's where you got stuff going. That's going to be the normal commuting area. So, I mean, within the bounds of the state of Utah, we're probably talking about, the basin, the north side of, north, like Flaming Gorge, Price, maybe down around Salina, Richfield, obviously southern Utah, so St. George and stuff like that, Monticello.
Does that have to be defined by the company? What they're
It's more of a facts and circumstances sort of a test. So what would happen is the way it would play out is this. You would have an employee that would ask for compensation for travel. Your answer would be no, because it's their normal commuting area. Their response would be, no, it's not my normal commuting area. And then there would be this discussion over what's the normal commuting area. So the thing that you would do is you would be bringing information about jobs jobs you've had going, say, for the last 4, 5, 6 years, something like that, jobs that you've been bidding and things like that. And you would kind of look at that and see where you are on a consistent basis, on a regular basis, and where you're bidding and getting your work and doing most of your work. And then you kind of derive something from that. And even if the bulk of your stuff is in, say, Weber, Davis, or Salt Lake, Davis, and Utah County, and Park City, say that's 80%. That doesn't necessarily mean that Weber County or Box Elder are out of it, because they're not that much farther away. So it's kind of like beauty's in the eye of the beholder. Commuting areas in the eye of the judge or the jury. So,
Dating, your question says traveling out of town for training. What about for work? Traveling out of town to work?
yeah,
Same thing?
you're sending them. They're going for your purpose. So if they're in their vehicle, regardless of time, they're on the clock. If they're in public transportation during regular hours, they're off.
That's interesting on 3B. You send somebody out of town for training. Most likely they're going to be at the trainings during the regular hours of business and traveling after hours,
Right.
but that's not compensated.
As long as they're traveling after hours, it's not, because the way that the Department of Labor looks at this, they're the ones who create the regulations. The way that they choose to look at this is that outside of normal working hours, your employee would be home watching TV or engaged in some social activity or something like that. They would be doing whatever they do on their own time. And if they're on a plane or on a bus or in some sort of transportation where someone's driving them, then they can be reading the paper, reading a book. That's what we did back when these regulations were created. They're pre-smartphone and stuff like that, but now reading their phones, those types of things. So that's why you have the distinction between them driving and them being transported, because in the eyes of the Department of Labor, being carried on a plane or a bus or a train or something like that is leisure. It's not work. And even if they chose to review plans or something like that, they're on their own time. They're making a choice to do that. They can't draw you as the employer into their personal life because they choose to engage in their job on their own time. They've just made their own decision to do that. You haven't compelled them to do that as their employer, so they're not going to be compensated for it. Does that?
But out of town work in the company vehicle, you pay the driver
Only
one way, both ways.
to go out? Walk me through what you're saying.
In a company vehicle, out of town work, you still have to pay them travel time.
So outside of their normal commuting area?
Yeah, out of town work. I'm guessing that'd be.
Are they going? Yeah, usually the other idea of out of town work is, and this is another factor in the commuting area, is that it's far enough they're not going to be home to sleep in their own bed that night. So to get out of town, so you've got your driver who's in the company vehicle and he's driving to this remote site, then yeah, you're paying him to drive there because he's driving the vehicle. Now, if he's got a bunch of guys riding with him, and as soon as you're outside of normal business hours, the passengers, you're not paying them, but the driver, you're paying. That makes sense? That does. Okay. Then once they get there, there's one of the questions in here is, what if I got guys staying in a hotel? Their hotel's their house, as far as this stuff goes. So just because they're not at home doesn't mean that you got to pay them to be at a hotel. So they're not on the clock the minute they wake up. It's the same sort of thing. If they go out, so let's say you got them working on a job for a week. So they go out Sunday night, they come back Friday night. So Sunday night when they leave, and you got 5 guys, 1 driver and 4 guys, they're in a crew cab pickup. So Sunday night, the driver's being paid. The 4 guys who aren't driving are not being paid. Monday morning, they're at the hotel. They all get in the truck to go to the job site. Nobody's being paid from the hotel to the job site. Everybody's being paid while they work. As soon as they get done and leave to come back to the hotel, everybody's off the clock. But on Friday night, if they leave the job site and the truck's loaded with all their stuff and they come straight home and they don't go to the hotel before they come home, then the drive to the hotel, they're not getting paid. But as soon as they're heading for home, then you're paying the driver. Any questions about that? Okay. Okay, question. So now on page 3. So the first question, these are the follow-up questions that we got that were after the survey. So the first question had to do with mileage reimbursement. This really isn't an employment question. This is more of a tax question. because mileage reimbursement is controlled more by federal tax law than it is by any employment laws. In fact, questions 1 through 5 all have to do with mileage reimbursement. But I'll answer these questions too. So here's a couple things to remember about mileage reimbursement. First rule of mileage reimbursement is this. Okay, remember, we're only talking about personal vehicles here. We're not talking about company vehicles. So you don't have, if someone's got a company vehicle, you're not reimbursing them for mileage, you're furnishing them with a company-owned vehicle. So if someone's driving their personal vehicle, you do not have to reimburse people for their mileage. There is no law in the United States that says, well, actually I take that back. Maybe in New York and California you have to. I intentionally am not licensed in those states. And usually whatever the federal government does, New York and California figure, that's just the start. Yeah, yeah. So they just make everything more complicated. That's why they're New York and California. All right, so outside of the goofy coastal states, there is no law that says that you have to reimburse your employees for using their own vehicle. It's 100% a choice that you make as a company if you're going to do it. The second rule of
If you do compensate them though, is that a W-2 compensation
No, it's a deductible expense. It's a deductible business expense.
to the company, but do they have to claim it as a compensation?
It's not income.
It's not.
No, it's a reimbursement for the use of their car. So if they would, it would be.
I meant in the company vehicle. Oh, you don't give them income.
No, if you're, yeah, if they're driving a company vehicle, then you do need to put a little bit of that onto their W-2, because you can do two things with it. If they're driving a company vehicle, you're not reimbursing them for mileage on their vehicle when they are doing job-related work. The flip side is if they have a company vehicle and they are permitted to use that vehicle for personal use, then you should be tracking their personal use. And then that personal use of the vehicle is considered to be income. And so that's subject to, that's taxable income. It's taxable income for income tax and for payroll tax. So that's what W-2 means, because you got both of those. You got state and federal income, and then you've got your withholdings on there. So you can, the simplest way to do it, like I use my vehicle for my job. So I've got an app that tracks everything I do, and then I just go in and I log my drives. And then I have to turn in a mileage reimbursement each month. And I have to be able to show why it's reimbursable. And then my law firm keeps that, so if we get audited, they can show why they reimbursed me for that mileage. So let me give you some examples. So driving to my office in Ogden, which is my primary office. I work in Ogden Monday, Wednesday, Friday right now. I'm in Salt Lake Tuesday, Thursday. So driving to Ogden, that's not reimbursable, that's commute. But as long as I don't have regular hours in Salt Lake for a year, then Salt Lake's considered to be a temporary remote site. So that's reimbursable. But if by the nature of what I'm doing, it's going to be more than a year, then that's not reimbursable. So there are some cases where people in various types of jobs, whether it's construction or otherwise, they're traveling to a remote site. It's not their regular. But if the contract's going to go past a year, then in the eyes of the IRS, they're commuting. That's not a deductible business expense that they can ask for.
So, Dana, Steve Scoggin, who does our taxes,
Uh-huh.
about 5 years ago when he started doing it, any of our guys that take a truck home, and the company pays for the gas in the truck.
Yeah.
If they're not on call and to come out and use that truck, we have to W-2 them.
Yeah.
And it started out at $450 a month, and now I think it's at $650 a month for that vehicle. But if they're actually on call and you can show several times in the year where they had to come out during the night to go on call, then they don't have to show that as income.
Yeah, yeah. I agree with that. Yeah. And there are some on-call rules that I put in here.
It's definitely a benefit to them to have a truck and company gas and everything to get
Right.
to and from work.
Right.
It's a huge benefit.
Yeah. Okay.
Jeff,
So you don't have to have a mileage reimbursement policy.
Oh, no. Sorry.
Now, Kevin brought up the on-call rules. There are some rules about being on call and when you have to pay people that are on call, and I put those in here if you want to look at them. I didn't go through and add them to any of the questions because it didn't come up in questions. But there are circumstances where if you've got somebody on call that they need to be compensated while they're on call. I don't think that applies for most of you. I know there are a few of the service companies who have employees who when they're on call, they've got them sitting in a shop or something like that. You're going to be paying them if they're there. But if they're at home, and especially if they've got, if you read that rule, if they've got the flexibility to kind of do what they want and it's an incidental thing, then it's less likely that you got to compensate them to be on call. But if you've got to park somewhere just waiting to go, then you got to pay them. So it has to do with the extent of control that you have over them and of their time that triggers an obligation to pay somebody, and also the frequency. All right, so let's go back to mileage deduction stuff. Okay, so like we said, you don't have to do it. It's up to you. The other big key with mileage reimbursement is that it can't be excessive. So the concern that comes up here is that since this is a deductible business expense, it's not compensation to your employee. You're paying them for the use of their vehicle, so they don't have to report it as income on their 1040. The business gets a deduction for this, so the business, it's not going to show up as income to you. It's an expense. You're taking it off. It's cutting down your income. So there's no taxes being paid on this on either the employer or the employee side. So because of that, the IRS gets really nervous. And so the big limitation is that you can't pay an excessive amount. So what's an excessive amount? Well, the basic rule is as long as you stay under whatever the federal limit is, whatever the federal government permits to reimburse its employees, you're safe. If you go over that, then you've got the burden to be able to show why the compensation that you gave your employee for their miles was reasonable at the higher rate that you chose to pay them. Now, if they have a very expensive vehicle to operate for some particular reason, maybe that gets you there. If there's a sudden unintended spike in gas prices, something like that, then maybe you can do it. So the rule of thumb is that you don't go any higher than what the federal government authorizes to reimburse federal employees.
And what do they authorize? It's 56.5 cents right now, I think.
Yeah.
What the IRS says
It's right in that
per
range.
mile.
So you can go anywhere from 0 to that, and you're safe. Start going over, you need to have a good reason. Okay, question number 2. How is the authorized mileage logged and verified? So I put on there smartphone apps work the best. So I've got this app that's called Mile IQ. And like I said, it tracks all my drives, and then it lets me know, so I can decide if it's personal or if it's business, and then I can say what it is. I can save locations in there that will automatically log. It's called Mile IQ.
Oh, mile IQ.
Yeah. Costs, I think I paid $50 a year for it. But the thing it does is it My
Is
law,
that $50 reimbursable?
it's my $50.
Expense.
Actually, do I run that? I paid that before I switched law firms. I actually did deduct that as a business expense.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah, yeah. And so like right now, my drive up to here was 20.7 miles, 11.28 of reimbursable income. It shows us from my Salt Lake office to the DATC. I've already got that in there. So it's right there. It's all set. And then I can swipe it left if it's personal, right if it's business. So it goes like that. And then it brings these up and I tap meeting and now it's logged. And then at the end of the month, I just print the report and I put a little description of what's in there. And so that way the finance committee can see it if they've got any questions and then they approve it. So that's how that one works.
Price the same app.
Yeah. So it works pretty good. I like it. Other than that, you're just going to have to do it manually, which doesn't work for me. Question 3, can an employer pay an agreed monthly amount rather than record each mile? Yeah, you could do that, but then you get into the danger of, if you get audited, remember we're dealing with the IRS here. This isn't, so we're not dealing with labor laws, we're dealing with tax laws. If you were audited, you're going to have to justify what you paid them based upon the mileage that they used. And so you're going to need some sort of a logging mechanism. Your employee's going to have to log their miles, track their miles, and you would have to take what you gave them divided by the mileage they used in order to get to the rate that you gave them and show that you're at or below that federal rate. So it's that seems like a lot to go through. But remember, the IRS only audits less than 1.5% of all tax returns because they have computers that go back to the 60s and still use tapes. So if you think that you can keep yourself and your employee lower than the applicable diff score, you're going to be okay.
About 15 years ago, I had all my guys keep a daily log for a month.
Mm-hmm.
I've been using that same log ever since because I figured it was an average month. Times it by 12 for the year. How much trouble am I going to be in?
Go to prison.
Well, if you're asking me for legal advice, the first thing I have to do is tell you that because everybody's here, there is no attorney-client privilege. Somewhere between quite a bit and a lot. How's that?
Good. So it's time I do another log, huh?
In a manner of speaking, yes. Besides insurance verification, this is question number 4 on page 3. What should an employer keep on file before paying for mileage reimbursement? The log of the miles that you're reimbursing and satisfactory evidence that the mileage you're reimbursing is deductible under federal income tax law. Number 5, are there any different reimbursement considerations for different types of vehicles? The short answer is no. Remember, the idea is that the IRS just isn't going to distinguish between a full-size pickup and a Toyota Corolla for purposes of this stuff. Even though there is a difference in the fuel consumption and stuff like that, they just treat them the same, and they don't let you have a higher rate even though your F-150 or whatever uses more gas. All right, any other questions on reimbursement? 6 is the last question. Can an employee file for a reimbursement for miles that were used for company business but not authorized? The answer is no if it violates your policy. So again, there's not the exception of the coastal states that have their own rules that Dana-Farber doesn't pay attention to. At least in Utah, there's no rule that says you have to compensate for mileage. It's all up to you. So if they do some sort of mileage for a business purpose, but it's not consistent with whatever policy you have at your office, then you don't have to compensate them. Question number 7, does an employer have a duty to pay for miles if the employee refuses or procrastinates reporting? Same thing, not if it violates your policy. So if your policy is, hey, we'll reimburse you for your miles, but you got to get them in within 30 days or something like that, or definitely after you close your books for the year, they show up with a bunch of stuff. Or if you have a fiscal year that's not the same as a calendar year and it's after your fiscal year, just whenever your books are closed, if they show up looking for it, then you can just tell them no, if that's the way it works at your place. All right. Question number 8. This was more of a question that kind of went out to the association, but I answered it anyway. What are people doing to their workers when they come in late and don't work a full week? My answer was fire them or only pay them for the time they're working. I don't know if any of you are doing anything different than that, but
You can't fire them now, you just have to humiliate them.
okay, so you can add on there, humiliate them. Anybody got anything else besides that? Is this like a millennial directed question?
What Kim and Bartol used to do, and I thought it was a good idea, was if they came in 15 minutes late, he docked them for a half hour.
Okay.
Is that legal?
Yeah, you can do that. I mean, as long as they're receiving minimum wage for the first 40 hours and 1.5 times their regular rate for any overtime in the week, yes.
It's a good idea. Because, you know, they think 5 minutes isn't late. I think that's on time. But if they lost a half hour, they start.
Well, then that means that 5 minutes before time to be there isn't early.
Yeah,
Right.
exactly. That's what
How
most
often
of
does that
them
happen,
think.
right?
That's what most of them.
All right, question number 9. Question number 9 was a rhetorical question. I didn't write that. I just put it straight on there how it came in. But so there was some concern expressed here that the government is reaching into the ability of us to operate our businesses.
I
So
don't know if you've watched it or not.
They don't.
did you lose somebody?
Oh, it says who's online.
Oh, it does.
Yep. But they don't know whether you're sitting in front of it watching.
Is that Ralph?
No, that's my brother.
Oh, it's your brother.
I can tell.
Yep, we're done.
All right, I'll give you an interesting legal fact about question number 9. So question number 9 was, basically, I think the idea behind question number 9 is that the federal government is placing too many requirements on employers to compensate their employees and should get out of the employers' lives. So up until the 1930s, when these types of laws were presented, the wage and hour laws are governed by what's called the Fair Labor Standards Act. It's part of the New Deal legislation that Roosevelt passed in the 30s. And then there's also another law that goes along with it that's called the Portal to Portal Act, which controls a lot of the commuting stuff we've been talking about here. So the Fair Labor Standards Act created minimum wage and overtime. There were previous efforts by the federal government to do that prior to the New Deal. And those laws were challenged as being unconstitutional because in the Bill of Rights, I can't remember which of the first 10 amendments it is, but it says that the government shall make no law that basically it says the government can't make a law that affects the right to contract. And so the Supreme Court of the United States, up until the 1930s, was consistently ruling that the relationship between an employer and an employee was a contract, and that the federal government was prohibited by the Constitution from sticking its nose into that relationship. And so minimum wage laws, overtime laws, those types of things were unconstitutional in the eyes of the United States Supreme Court, and they were consistently struck down. So in the 30s, Roosevelt was starting to get some of the same treatment from the United States Supreme Court with his early New Deal legislation. So Roosevelt went out and he said he was going to stack the court. The Constitution of the United States requires that we have a Supreme Court, but it doesn't say how many judges are on the Supreme Court. So the fact that we have nine judges on the Supreme Court of the United States is tradition. It's not law. So at Roosevelt, all Roosevelt needed was a majority. So he said he was going to stack the court. And Obama made some comments about stacking the court. Trump's talked a little bit about stacking the court. It comes up every now and then. So what that would mean is that if he's getting 5-4 votes that are going against his stuff, then he needs to get 2 more. So he's going to make it a court of 11 and put 2 people on the court who he's confident are going to vote his way, so that he can start getting 6-5 opinions instead of 5-4 opinions. So I can't remember which justice it was, but Roosevelt went out and started making noise about this, and that particular justice flipped, so it started going 5-4 in Roosevelt's favor, and that's how the Fair Labor Standards Act was able to pass constitutional muster back in the 30s. So some of you may have heard the saying before that, what is it? A stitch in time saves 9. That's something from sewing. So the press changed that a little bit, and they said a switch in time saves 9. So that judge flipping to Roosevelt's side on the contract clause in the Bill of Rights is one of the reasons why Roosevelt didn't stack the court. Now, there are a lot of people who say he really wouldn't have done it because it would have been political suicide, if there is such a thing as political suicide anymore, at least. But that's why the government now gets its nose into the employer-employee relationship, is because of the New Deal and Roosevelt's threat to stack the court. How's that? That's my answer to question number 9. Number 10, can travel time be paid at regular rate even if they have worked more than 40 hours in the week? There are some, I'm going to rephrase that question because the use of regular rate doesn't work right there, and I'll explain why. So I've had this type of question come up before. So I'll state it in a way that works to where I think this question is going. I've had people ask me before, contractors say, can I pay my guys a different rate to travel than when they're at the job site? So if there's somebody that I have to pay to travel, can I pay them at a different rate when they travel? And the answer is yes, you can do that. But regular rate is not like their regular pay. And the other thing is that you can't control which hours are overtime and which hours are not overtime. So you can just control what you pay your employees for given work. Like if you go to question number 14, it was just commission-based pay. So I assumed that the question was, is it okay to pay your employees commission? And the answer is yeah, as long as their first 40 hours are paid at minimum wage, and you pay them 1.5 times regular rate for any overtime, then you can pay them a commission. So that's why on the very back I got this explanation of what regular rate is. All right. The confusion that a lot of people get into on regular rate is they think this: well, if I pay my employee, if I'm paying my guys $20 an hour, let's say, then that's their regular rate. That's not. That's their wage. If they don't get any compensation besides their hourly wage, then their hourly wage is also their regular rate. Because overtime is 1.5 times regular rate. It's not 1.5 times like your wage. It's 1.5 times your regular rate. So you've got, so to calculate regular rate, first you start with their wage. So whatever their wage is. But then if you've got some sort of incentive compensation or some sort of a commission or any other way that your employees are compensated.
So health insurance, Doesn't count as part of that.
Now those are benefits, that doesn't count. So let's go, you can look at it on the examples on the back. So let's say your base, say you're paying them $20 an hour, and then you have a really great month, and so the last day of the month, you give everybody a $500 bonus, all of your employees. Well, in that pay period, that $500 bonus that you gave them has to get spread over, if you pay every 2 weeks, then it has to get spread over those 80 hours and added into their base pay as part of their compensation, and that becomes part of their regular rate. So anything in a given, well, actually I said that wrong. Forget everything I just said. In the work week that you give them the $500 bonus, you have to divide, actually let's say it's a $400 bonus because we got to divide it by 40. So in the week they get the $400 bonus, then that means that they received an extra, what, $10? $10 an hour. So their regular rate in that week is $30 an hour. So if they worked any hour, and if they worked overtime, any hours, any minutes over 40, you have to pay them $45 an hour because their regular rate was 30. Did I lose you guys, or did you follow me on that?
So the bonuses aren't treated differently then?
The bonus is compensation on top of their wage. And so it has to be, so you put it into their overall compensation. So you take 40 times 20, because that's their wage, and that's what, 800? Then you give them another $500, so now we're at 1,300. So you divide 1,300 by 40, that's their regular rate. All of their overtime in that work week has to be 1.5 times their regular rate for that work week.
Is anybody doing that?
Nobody's gonna do that. I'm just telling you how it works.
Nobody's ever gonna do that. It's too damn hard.
That sure makes you want
Just
to
say,
apply.
hey, sorry, guys, we're no more bonuses.
I don't want to pay bonuses anymore.
I know guys who do profit sharing and stuff like that, where you know, at the end of the year, you share some of the overall profit of the company. And if you do that, let me tell you the right way to do that and the wrong way to do it. Well, I shouldn't say the right way and the wrong way. Let me tell you the most economical way to do it and the least economical way to share profits with your employees. The most economical way to share profits with your employees is to have a profit sharing component on your 401k, because that fits, and it doesn't have to be with the 401k, but I'm assuming that a lot of you have 401ks or some sort of a qualified plan under ERISA. So if you have a profit sharing part of that, then what you can do is you can take money, and you don't have to do it at the end of the year. You can do it throughout the year, but you can put money into your profit sharing plan. A lot of businesses, especially C corporations, do it at the end of the year. But anyway, you can take profit of the business, and you can set the plan up so that you don't have to do this every year. So if you don't have a good year, you're not obligated to put that in. So you don't have to put yourself out of business to share with your employees. You always want to make sure it's optional. It's not promised to them. That's very key. But anyway, what you do is you take this additional income that you've got and you put it into this plan. Now, if it goes into a qualified plan, then the business gets a deduction for that. That's a deductible business. It's not a defined benefit. A defined benefit would be that they're going to get something specific when they retire, but it's basically the employer putting money on top of their own 401k stuff. So it's discretionary.
Set that up for us where it's combined profit sharing defined benefit.
Yes.
And so we put 1/3 of our profits every year into that.
Yeah.
And it kicks back some pretty good bonuses to the guys.
Yeah, it can be a really great way to provide
But the
compensation
government
for your employees.
Pays for a third of that, basically.
Right,
That's why
yeah,
they do it.
because if it's a lot of times it's money that would otherwise be going out in taxes.
Exactly.
And so it creates tax savings for you because it's a deductible business expense. The other thing you can do on those plans is you can we have this at our office. You can go up to 5 years before it vests. And so it's a form of golden handcuffs on your employees because you're putting this money in there every year. If they're making 401k contributions, it's going in and it's increasing what they're putting away on with their own deferrals and stuff like that. They sit in there and they matches that you're going on. It's on top of that. And so they're building this nice nest egg. And so to kind of lock them into you, you don't let it vest for 5 years, and that's the maximum that you can go. And it also, it has to go, it can't just be focused on what's referred to as highly compensated employees, which is usually the owners. So it has to be able to be in there for everybody, and it's generally distributed based upon their percentages of wage and stuff like that. There are different ways you can do it. But anyway, what it comes down to is that you put the money in there because that's money that oftentimes the owners would be paying income tax on because it would pass through to you or you would take it in income. So now you put it in, so you've saved that tax. The other thing is, if you don't give it to your employees as a wage, then you're not having to worry about regular rate and overtime and stuff like that. And you don't have to pay payroll taxes on it. Everything your employee gets as a wage, the government gets 15%. Well, just a little over 15, but about 7.5 to use the employer, 7.5 to your employee. So those plans, that's ways, it's a way that you get money to your employees, and there's no payroll taxes on it. You as an owner get income tax savings on it. You put a long vesting period on it, so that's an incentive for your people to stay with you for a long time and tie them to you, and then you're creating loyalty and stuff with them.
So what happens if they leave and they're not fully vested? If they leave after 2 years, it's 5 years. Stays in your pot. They lose it all?
Yeah. Well,
Just what they're not
if they're
invested.
contributing to their 401k, they get their own 401k. So if they're putting money into their 401k and you're doing an employer match, they get that. That goes with them, but the profit sharing doesn't. It gets distributed throughout the plan if they leave early.
Really?
They don't get it. It didn't vest.
See, I give mine as quickly as I can, just so they have something in their pocket.
And I think it works the same way. I mean, once you get that started and get it to them, they're gonna stay.
Well, yeah, I mean, they're getting some pretty good bucks, but what frustrates is when somebody leaves and then next year it comes around and you have to cut them a check.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, they're gone. We'll split this between you guys that are here.
Yeah. So yeah, so there's some, if you want to do profit sharing with your employees, spend some time with some people who understand retirement savings. And I'm just kind of giving you a general overview of that, but there are a lot of ways that you can use that tax law. It's called ERISA, Employee Retirement Income Security Act. There are a lot of ways to use that to compensate your employees in ways that save them taxes and that save you taxes and save you overtime and stuff like that. So, it wouldn't hurt to have, who's that guy at Scoggins' office that knows that? Well, we've got a couple of ERISA lawyers in my office, but we keep those guys in the cellar. They don't get a lot of sunlight, don't they?
No, there's some guys.
Yeah, but I mean,
It also allows the owner to get a pretty good chunk of change out of
yeah,
too.
because
They can't get
as an owner, you're the highly
without
compensated
taxes.
employee, and so as long as you meet what's referred to as discrimination testing, which means that you're not overcompensating yourself by putting money into the plan, but fairly distributing it at appropriate ratios to your employees, you can chuck a ton of money in there for your retirement, and really set yourself up well. So it's something that you should really look at closely. So That guy at Scoggins' office does a really good job of explaining those things. Who am I thinking of?
Steve?
No,
No, there's Steve, but he's got an attorney that works with him that really knows ERISA, or not an attorney. He's got another accountant down there, the shorter guy.
Ed?
Start with a D. Is it Derek? Derek? Is that his name?
There is, it seems like there is.
I'll ask him.
Usually the guys that actually come out and sign you up on it. The guys I think of.
You can check. If not, I can talk with the ERISA guys at our office.
But the government
Scoggins
sets all
Indiana.
of those things. You have no discretion, no control over that. You know, you put that money in, the government decides how much every employee gets.
Well, that's the
Well, you can-
discrimination testing,
yeah.
is to make sure that you're not really just
Yeah.
putting a bunch of money in
Because
your pocket.
you can't make sure, I mean, then they let you have about 3 levels. You have a A, B, and a C level, but, you know, all those people get the same, and it depends on their age, how long they've been with you, they get more.
That's what's called, that's the discrimination testing. That's what they call it. And you can do, I mean, the IRS has created regulations that allow you to do some things that fit squarely within their regs. They can make it sort of the planning economical. But you can step outside of their regulations and do something totally custom. Accountants usually won't touch that. You've got to get lawyers, ERISA lawyers to do it.
Yeah.
But then but it becomes more expensive to manage, because then you've got all the testing fees and stuff you do every year. So, but if you don't do that in your business, it's worth whatever money you spend to talk to somebody on it, because if you're sharing any money with your employees right now, what it's costing you in terms of overtime, payroll taxes, and them and you and income taxes and stuff is going to be more than what it would cost you to set up a plan, probably in the first year, definitely within the first couple. So you'll save money on it. All right, should I stop or keep going? So I'll zip through these last ones really quick. 11, when talking about picking up other employees in a company truck or personal truck on the way to work, is there a difference if they are choosing their own carpool to work versus if they requested to be picked up? If your employees are arranging a carpool, then that's fine. You're not bound by whatever they're doing with carpooling.
They need
and
to
stuff.
start paying you for the gas if they're doing
Yeah.
company truck.
They need to let you know you're going to reduce their wages that much because they're not spending money on fuel. So that's tax savings to the business. It's their turn to help the employer, right?
Yeah.
Number 12, these questions leave a lot of room for interpretation. Yep. 13, out of town. We talked about out of town. I talked about the hotel and stuff, so we already did that. Commission-based pay. Yeah, so you can pay a commission as long as the amount that somebody receives in a work week equals at least minimum wage for their first 40 hours and 1.5 times their regular rate for any overtime.
Is anybody doing that?
Maybe Burger King or McDonald's.
Okay. Nobody here.
No, I don't think anybody here is paying minimum wage. If you wanted to, you could pay your employees minimum wage. If there's a situation where you have to pay them to travel, you could say when you're traveling, you only get minimum wage. Or you could even say,
I've heard of somebody in the association doing that.
yeah. The other thing too is this. You could actually tell your employees they only get $1 when they're traveling.
$1?
Yeah. Because the total compensation for the work week has to equal at least minimum wage for their first 40 and 1.5 times at regular rate for everything over 40 hours. So if when they're working, you're paying them at a high enough rate that the time they spend traveling is short enough that they will always have minimum wage for their first 40 and 1.5 times at their regular rate for the rest of it. Yeah. So that's in concept. That's what you have to make sure that you achieve is you can divide the work week wherever you want. There's some businesses, offices. There's some offices that do this. They split their work week at noon on Fridays. So the last 4 hours on Friday are the next work week. And so you can, I used to do this with some of my staff. They would get a 3 days off every other week. If you have 2 employees that work for you, they can alternate so that every other Friday they have off. So you can split the work week wherever you want. Your compensation is just that they have to have minimum for their first 40 and 1.5 times regular rate after. Other than that, you can compensate your employees in any way you want to. Commission, incentives, hourly, whatever.
Then I was told too that the 40 hours can be consecutive. I mean, if you work 40 hours straight,
Yes,
anything over that is overtime.
that's right.
If you work 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, 40 hours straight, you know,
Say you go 9 hours a day, that's not right.
or
No,
a
it's-
regular
no.
pay period, if it's every
You
2
can-
weeks and
that's
80
right.
hours, you could
The
work 80
first-
hours straight.
The first, what you do, you can't choose. You can choose how to compensate your employees for their activities. But as soon as your employee has worked 40 hours in their work week, wherever you start your work week, as soon as they have worked 40 hours in the work week, then they get 1.5 times their regular rate for every hour over 40. So if you guys are doing a lot of driving late in the week, you can't say, and it's a 60-hour week, you can't say, well, all those driving hours, I'm gonna call that regular and stuff like that. You can't pick and choose. As soon as they've worked 40, then they're every hour after that's 1.5 times regular rate.
I'm sure everybody's doing that.
Yeah, thank you, Dana.
So for bonus, if you write a bonus out to a guy,
Yeah.
the week you write him that bonus,
Yes.
that has to count as overtime?
No.
No.
The week that you write him the bonus, that bonus money you give him is considered to be part of his compensation for the week. So you've got his hourly wage for the week. Whatever you give him for the bonus, you add on top of the hourly wage.
Yeah.
And then you take all of that money.
What if you don't want to do that?
I'm just telling you the way that the law explains it.
I've never heard it that way.
I've never been to it, so definitely, I was assuming they could do it.
So that's considered part of their
I
compensation.
mean, it's actually a quarterly bonus that I give them.
Yeah.
And, but the day I give it to them is when it counts that week. It doesn't really count for the
It's
quarter.
considered compensation. It's considered part of their, it has to be factored in their regular rate for that work week. And so if they have overtime, then you have to pay overtime with that bonus as part of the regular rate.
That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard.
So if they only put 40 hours in that week, then you don't have to worry about it.
You know,
Right.
if there's only if they work-
Bonuses on
it's
any-
only if they work over
overtime.
40 hours in the week.
All right, that's not so bad.
Yeah.
All right, thank you very much, Dana. We appreciate Dana being here with us. Those who are online, if you just make sure there's 3 callers, I need to know who they are. Other than that, everybody else has a name figured with it, and we'll see you next month. Thank you, everybody. Grab you some sandwiches.